Let's get to our panel right now. Joining us here in Washington is veteran South African journalist Simon Barber. James early served as Director of Cultural Heritage Policy with the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage in Washington. Also with us is Nhlanhla Sehume. He covers South African politics as a journalist and radio news anchor in Johannesburg. Simon, let me start with you. Cyril Ramaphosa, now the new president of South Africa, how big a job does he have? I mean, on the one hand, he's the head of the government. On the other hand, he's also the head of the ANC. Can he reconcile those two positions?
Yes, I think this notion of Twin Peaks is, I think we can put that to rest. He does face a huge uphill challenge, as the ambassador has been saying. I think his immediate priority has got to be able to reassure Moody's, the investment rating agency, who are going to make a decision towards the end of next month on whether to downgrade South Africa's debt, which would be quite disastrous economically. So he's got to be able to show that he has got policies lined up that are going to have a good chance of restoring growth, while at the same time restricting the expansion of the debt. And that's a difficult one because for growth you need to prime the pump, and he hasn't got much to prime it with. So he's going to be reaching out to investors, both domestically and internationally, to restore their confidence and hope raise the investment levels again.
Simon, do you think he has the full support of the ANC?
I think there are pockets where he won't. I'm pretty confident, though, that he's going to be able to hold it together. Because I think the ANC as a whole knows that they were on a hiding to nowhere with Zuma, and they're most interested in retaining power and office. And of course, I mean, to be very cynical about it, and I don't think Cyril Ramaphosa is a particularly cynical politician, but to be very cynical about it, he is now the boss, and the patronage flows for him. So those people who are thinking of opposing him are going to have to realize that they may, there's no soup for them.
Okay, let's go to Johannesburg, to Nhlanhla Sehume. He joins us from there. And Nhlanhla, of course, these are heady days in South Africa, and probably very exciting to be a journalist down there. But do you sense that there is now a general mood of optimism in the country, notwithstanding the fact, as we just heard from the ambassador, that the new president faces some formidable challenges?
Certainly, there is a mood of optimism surrounding the new president, Cyril Ramaphosa. He is a man who's seen as one who would bring prosperity to the country, especially given recent developments, whereas we've had a president whose presidency has been mired by corruption, weak governance, and poor leadership. So South Africans are generally very excited about President Ramaphosa's election, or, well, him leading the country going forward. What are you hearing? We've just lost our audio to Nhlanhla. Let me go to you, James. What do you make of the events of the past, well, let's say 48 hours?
Well, I think there's a third factor that circumscribes Ramaphosa. In addition to being potential president of the country, he has this interim time frame before the national elections in 2019, and also head of the ANC, which is a highly factionalized grouping where I think he's going to face a lot of struggle. I think the fact that Zuma has been pushed out was a pragmatic decision on the part of his own allies in the central grouping, being concerned that they will lose some ground in the election. So it is not a pro-Ramaphosa view, in my view, of those who had been allied with Zuma before. But a third factor that Ramaphosa is deeply embedded in, and that is he was head of the National Planning Commission. That commission involves all of the corporate entities. Ramaphosa is a deeply embedded multi-millionaire, $450 million he may be worth, Coca-Cola, mining operations. This is another vector, another force that he's going to have to mediate. And the bottom line is going to be, will Ramaphosa in those very three aspects align himself with organized civil society, unions of which he helped to create civil society, strong civic organizations who are not waiting for distribution, but who are collaborating on policies? Or will he be the mediator for those other three pillars that he occupies? And if he's the mediator for those other three pillars, then I think we see a typical front across the world that an over-endowment in the personality of a leader or the index of the stock market or GNP and all of that will not redound to eradicating poverty, which is as bad as it was during the apartheid period, 27% unemployment, a high crime rate, the assault on women. He's got to be involved with organized citizens, and I question whether he will be ready to actually step down back where he was as a union leader, rather than to be a broker with those three pillars, the ANC, the presidency, and embedded in the corporate arena there.
What do you make of that, Simon?
I think I'd take issue with that, Mr. Early. I think, first of all, just as a more general point about South Africa as a whole, however bad the past few years have been under the Zuma kleptocracy, as it's being called, we've got to remember that, in fact, South Africa is much, much better off in many ways, in fact, almost every way, than it was in 1994, in terms of the number of people in jobs, in terms of the safety net, in terms of the number of graduates from African graduates from schools. I mean, all of this it's completely different. It's much better off. And if you take a look at polls, there is the South African Institute of Racial Relations has recently done surveys of where people stand. There is a great deal of support for what Cyril Ramaphosa is going to be doing in terms of reviving the economy. I think that in terms of him being a mediator, that's what I really see him as being, because he's the man who founded the National Union of Mine Workers. And he is also sat on every major board there is, in corporate board in South Africa. So, I mean, he knows exactly how all sides are thinking here. And of course, he comes out of the United Democratic Front. So his struggle credentials and his civil society credentials are very strong. So I take a bit of issue with it.
Well, selling people's emotional framework around an individual, as we saw around the great Nelson Mandela, but the compromise was actually made too low. They inherited the debt of the white supremacist apartheid state. They inherited the neoliberal paradigm, the lower role of the state and the welfare of the civilians. The index of poverty has actually gone up, violence has gone up, and it is true that statistically you've got more people in the middle class, and economic empowerment did bring some multimillionaires, much like the United States of America. And as you look at the United States of America, when you look at 3/4 of Black Americans, we are worse off than we were during the period of segregation, notwithstanding the fact that we've got a solid middle class and a few people who've moved to be millionaires. Right. So we're looking at a paradigm that is a problem. We're also looking at the greater Southern Africa. South Africa can, while it is now the second largest economy, it is the most stable economy. Nigeria is the largest, but it is really not as efficiently organized as is South Africa. But Malawi, Botswana, all of those countries, we also have to examine how these policies have had effects there. And so the test for Ramaphosa will be in relationship to his collaboration with organized citizens, not his mediating role for the vertical hierarchy in which the citizen receives the distribution, but is a passive citizen. And we're seeing this problem all over the world, including in the United States. Okay, let me go back to Johannesburg, and Nhlanhla's back with us. And then, Nhlanhla, what's become of Jacob Zuma in the past 48 hours? He's still facing all these allegations. What is the legal process that he faces right now?
Well, right now, nothing much has been said regarding the 783 charges that the president faces, besides the fact that the NPA, or the National Prosecutions Authority of the country, has promised that it will not overlook these charges. It will still be assessing the nature of the charges and still proceeding with the cases, or rather the charges linked to corruption that are facing the president. But the president resigning on Wednesday, leaving on a very somber note, saying that, look, his parting shot to South Africans was that we will meet somewhere. Very vague. No one really understands what he meant by that. But it's certainly not the last that we are seeing of President Jacob Zuma. And chances are the next time we will be seeing him, or the next time the South Africans will be seeing him, is in court.
Now, Cyril Ramaphosa inherits the Zuma cabinet. I guess he's not obliged to retain that cabinet. In fact, I'm guessing it would be in his interest to bring in his own people. What is the status of the cabinet right now?
Well, Cyril Ramaphosa is yet to name his new cabinet, although there has been a speculation surrounding the appointment of a new finance minister, with the current finance minister being Malusi Gigaba, who some analysts have said lacks what his predecessors have shown, or the kind of quality or promising to ensure tough governance. So we are yet to see if there will be a cabinet reshuffle. If one does happen, we do expect that it would be imminent, and we could see one very soon.
And that would give us a very good idea of where he's going, right?
Yes, it would. Cyril Ramaphosa's ticket to him being elected was that he would ensure that corruption is dealt with. The ANC has been mired by controversy surrounding allegations of corruption, weak governance. So these are things that Cyril Ramaphosa has promised to tighten up, saying that he will also ensure that the economy picks up. South Africa faces very gloomy times right now, with recession having hit the country twice, both in 2009 and 2017. Unemployment numbers are also hitting the roof, which is something that Cyril Ramaphosa will be looking at quite closely to see what measures he will put in place to ensure that the economy grows and that jobs are created going forward.
Simon, the New York Times published an editorial on South Africa in which it referred to South Africa as a broken democracy. Do you believe democracy has been broken?
I think that's actually almost 100% wrong. I think what we've seen in the way in which the power has transited in South Africa, we've actually seen democratic institutions working very well. This was no coup. They played by the rules. Basically, Jacob Zuma was given the option of having a vote of no confidence, which he would have lost, or of resigning. He resigned. And this whole process, I think, is an enormous tribute to the strength of our courts, who basically said that President Zuma had violated the Constitution. It's a huge tribute to the strength of our media, who played a big role in exposing the Gupta scandals, and of our civil society generally. So I think we're actually seeing a pretty healthy democracy here.
James, South Africans go to the polls next year. Now, in previous elections, the question was not who would win, the ANC would win. The question was how big a margin would they win by. The next election, would the ANC be in some kind of trouble?
I think it's going to be a close call. The fact of the matter is, empirically, the ANC has lost a lot of populist support. They've lost in some of the major cities. You have insurgent developments with Malema, the Democratic Freedom Party, which I don't put a lot of confidence in. You've got left-wing unions in NUMSA that has split from the South African Coalition of Trade Unions. Now, you've got Ramaphosa, who was a trade unionist, who organized ordinary people to be active democratic participants in the negotiation of the material development of their lives. Now the discussion is looking at a vertical pole where he will be distributing downward. That's going nowhere. It's going nowhere on the face of the entire globe, including in the United States of America. And we're seeing these populist movements of unions, women's movements, millennials, organizing to collaborate with their stewards of government, not to give praise to the political class. And the question for Ramaphosa and the ANC will be, can he operate within the political class, within the capitalist class, but also be a collaborator with the multiple reflections of organized citizens? And that's going to be the outstanding question. I'm certainly hopeful, but I think the proof must be in the pudding, and we must judge him by how he collaborates with organized citizens, particularly with trade unions, for which in recent years he does not have a very good record. While he cannot be accused of what happened in Marikani, he was certainly complicit in the broader context of what happened. He didn't act as a trade unionist.
Let me go very quickly to Nhlanhla. Nhlanhla, I've just got about 20 seconds left. South Africa will soon be in the middle of an election campaign for the next elections. If we have a big Jacob Zuma trial taking place at the same time as these campaigns, is that a major liability for the ANC?
It is a major liability, but South Africans will be looking at the ANC's approach or attitude to the legal proceedings that will be taking place and how they respond to them. Cyril Ramaphosa has said that he will ensure that any allegations of corruption are dealt with adequately or dealt with properly, but also promising not to overreach. So the country will be looking very closely as to how these cases are dealt with and how the ANC responds to it.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.